Captain Daniel Wright stood perfectly still on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Valiant, as the holographic image flickered to life before him. The alien face that appeared was like nothing found on Earth, a being made of what looked like living crystal that caught and reflected the dim bridge lights in 1,000 different angles. This was Ambassador Kalara of the Zenthi Consortium, and she was about to deliver yet another demand to humanity. Daniel had been through this same routine 17 times in the past 3 years, and each time the demands grew worse, more restrictive, more insulting. The translator device hummed softly as Kalara's words were converted into English. Her voice came through cold and clinical, devoid of any warmth or understanding. She spoke as if reading from a prepared script, which she probably was because the Galactic Council never bothered to personalize their communications with humanity. To them, humans were just another primitive species that needed to be controlled and managed until they learned their place. In the grand order of things, humanity will reduce its colonial expansion by 70% effective immediately, Kalara announced without any preamble or greeting. You will surrender all territorial claims to the Proxima system and evacuate your settlements within 60 standard days. All human vessels will require council inspection before entering established trade routes. These terms are final and not subject to negotiation or appeal. Daniel felt his jaw tighten as he listened to the ultimatum. Behind him, he could hear the soft breathing of his bridge crew as they too absorbed the words. Everyone knew what this meant. The Proxima system was home to over 2 million human colonists who had spent the last decade building farms and cities and lives on 3 different worlds. Surrendering it would mean abandoning those people, leaving them to the mercy of whatever species the Council decided to award the territory to next. Commander Lisa Hayes stood at his right shoulder, her tablet displaying the full text of the Council's demands. She was his executive officer, his second in command, and in the 3 years they had served together, Daniel had learned to read her moods by the slightest changes in her posture. Right now her spine was rigid, her shoulders set in a way that told him she was just as angry as he was, but working hard to maintain her professional composure. The demands went on for another 5 minutes. Humanity would pay increased tariffs on all interstellar trade. Human scientists would be forbidden from researching certain technologies without council approval. Human ships would be limited in size and armament. Every regulation seemed designed not to protect the galaxy, but to keep humanity weak, dependent, and under the Council's control. It had been 15 years since Dr. Helen Carter had invented the skip drive and given humanity faster than light travel. 15 years since humans had burst out into the galaxy full of hope and wonder, eager to meet other intelligent species and take their place among the stars. Those early years had been magical. First contact with the Lumina Collective had been peaceful. Trade agreements with the Krask Empire had seemed fair. When the Galactic Council had invited humanity to apply for associate membership, it had felt like recognition, like acceptance, like the beginning of something wonderful. But that feeling had died quickly. The Council's application process had been deliberately slow and filled with impossible requirements. Every time humanity met one standard, the Council added 3 more. Meanwhile, human expansion into space was subjected to increasingly harsh restrictions. The Council controlled all the major trade routes, all the resource-rich systems, all the valuable real estate in the known galaxy. They had been doing it for thousands of years, long before humanity had even invented the wheel, and they were not interested in sharing. Daniel had joined the Earth Defense Fleet right out of college, back when the fleet was more of a coast guard than a real military force. He had been part of the generation that believed humanity's future was peaceful cooperation with alien species. He had studied xenodiplomacy and alien cultures. He had volunteered for every first contact mission he could. But 7 years of service had taught him a hard lesson. The galaxy was not interested in cooperation with humanity. The galaxy was interested in keeping humanity in its place. The holographic image of Ambassador Kalara finished reading the demands and paused, waiting for Daniel's response. According to protocol, he was supposed to acknowledge receipt of the demands, promise to forward them to Earth Command, and assure the Council of Humanity's continued cooperation. He had done exactly that 16 times before. Lisa leaned closer and whispered so softly that only he could hear. "Sir, Earth Command is signaling on the secure channel. Admiral Cole wants your response before you reply to the Council." Daniel glanced at the communication station where Lieutenant Jake Morris was managing the incoming channels. Jake was young, barely 25, but he had excellent instincts, and right now his face showed the same barely controlled anger that Daniel suspected was visible on his own features. Around the bridge, the rest of the crew waited. They were all watching him, waiting to see what he would do. He thought about the 2 million colonists on Proxima who would be forced to abandon their homes. He thought about the families who had saved for years to buy passage to the colony worlds, hoping for a better life than Earth could offer with its 10 billion people crowding every continent. He thought about the miners on Proxima 3, who had just struck a major deposit of rare elements that could power Earth's industries for decades. He thought about his own sister Claire, who had moved to Proxima 2 with her husband and 3 children just 8 months ago. Daniel had spent 3 years bending to council demands. 3 years of filing reports and requesting permissions and accepting insults. 3 years of watching humanity's dreams get smaller and smaller as the council tightened its grip. He had convinced himself it was necessary, that patience and diplomacy would eventually win out, that if humans just proved themselves worthy, the council would eventually treat them as equals. But standing there on his bridge, looking at Ambassador Kalara's crystalline face with its complete lack of empathy or respect, Daniel realized he had been lying to himself. The council would never see humanity as equals. They would always see humans as primitives who needed to be controlled. And if humanity kept accepting these demands, kept backing down, kept surrendering piece by piece, there would eventually be nothing left to surrender. He made his decision in that moment, though he knew it might end his career or even start a war. Some things were more important than career advancement. Some things were worth fighting for. "Close the channel to the council," Daniel said quietly. The communication officer looked confused. "Sir, Ambassador Kalara is still waiting for your acknowledgement of the demands." "I know," Daniel replied. "Close the channel." The holographic image vanished. For a moment, the bridge was absolutely silent. Everyone understood what had just happened. For the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community, an Earth vessel had refused to respond to a council directive. It was the equivalent of hanging up on someone mid-sentence, a deliberate insult that could not be mistaken for a technical malfunction. Lisa stared at him with wide eyes. "Sir, did you just—" "Get me Admiral Cole on the command channel," Daniel interrupted, "and send a message to every human ship in this sector. Tell them what just happened. Tell them it's time to stop talking and start standing up." Within the hour, the response came from Earth Command. Admiral Richard Cole appeared on the main screen, his weathered face showing a mix of concern and something else, something that looked almost like relief. Behind him, Daniel could see the chaos of the command center with officers rushing between stations and screens, displaying fleet positions across human space. "Captain Wright," Admiral Cole began, and there was no anger in his voice. "You just told the Galactic Council to go to hell." "Yes, sir, I did," Daniel confirmed. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he smiled. "Good, it's about damn time someone did. Stand by for fleet-wide orders." The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, a massive structure that floated in orbit around the neutral world of Cala Prime. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, capable of hosting representatives from species that breathed different atmospheres, lived at different temperatures, and existed in entirely different states of matter. Holographic projectors allowed members to attend from their homeworlds while appearing physically present, and the translation systems could handle over 3,000 different languages simultaneously. Right now, 12 species sat in emergency session, and every single one of them was talking about humanity. Ambassador Kalara stood at her designated position, her crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated extreme agitation in her species. She had been the one delivering the ultimatum when the human captain had simply cut off communication, and she took the insult personally. In the thousands of years that the Galactic Council had existed, no species had ever simply refused to respond to a direct command. "This is an outrage," Kalara announced, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "The humans have rejected galactic authority. They have shown complete disrespect for this council and everything it represents. We cannot allow this behavior to stand without consequences. I propose immediate economic sanctions against all human-controlled territory. No council species should trade with them, supply them, or communicate with them until they apologize and accept our terms." Several other representatives murmured agreement. The Yalari delegate, a floating jellyfish-like creature from the ocean world of Yalar, pulsed in rhythm with Kalara's words. The Draken ambassador, whose species resembled enormous beetles, clicked his mandibles in what his people used as applause. The council had grown comfortable in its power over millennia, and the idea that a newcomer species would dare to defy them was both shocking and infuriating, but not everyone agreed with harsh measures. Ambassador Hela of the Lumina Collective remained silent, her energy form dimmed in thought. The Lumina were one of the oldest species in the council, beings of pure energy who had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago. They rarely spoke in council sessions, but when they did, others listened. Hela had been watching humanity closely since first contact, and she had concerns that none of the other council members seemed to share. General Vorn of the Krask Empire was not interested in economic sanctions. The Krask were a warrior species, reptilian in appearance with scales like armor and claws that could tear through steel. They had joined the Galactic Council 3,000 years ago, after a devastating war that had nearly destroyed their civilization. Since then, they had served as the Council's military arm, enforcing decisions and maintaining order. Vorn believed in direct action and had little patience for diplomatic niceties. Economic sanctions are a waste of time, Vorn growled, his translator converting his hissing speech into standard galactic. The humans need to learn respect, and they will not learn it through trade restrictions. I say we make an example of them. Send a military fleet to one of their outer colonies, not to conquer, just to demonstrate our power. Destroy some of their infrastructure, make them realize how vulnerable they are. After they see what we can do, they will be much more willing to negotiate. Kalara's form brightened at the suggestion. General Vorn speaks wisdom. Perhaps we have been too gentle with the humans. They are young and aggressive, like children testing boundaries. A show of force would teach them the consequences of defiance. More representatives voiced their agreement. The Council had maintained peace in the galaxy for thousands of years, but that peace had been built on the understanding that the Council's word was law. If humanity was allowed to defy the Council without punishment, other species might begin to question the system as well. That could not be permitted. Ambassador Hela finally spoke, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I urge caution, Council members. We know very little about human military capabilities. They have been compliant until now, yes, but compliance is not the same as weakness. Their history suggests they are quite capable of warfare. Before we take military action, we should consider whether we truly understand what we are dealing with. Vorn made a dismissive gesture with one clawed hand. The humans have been in space for barely 15 years. We have been traveling between stars since before their species learned to make fire. What can they possibly do against our fleets? This is not about capability, Ambassador Hela. This is about maintaining order. If we show weakness now, we will regret it. The vote was called. 11 species voted in favor of sending a military fleet to human space. Only the Lumina Collective abstained, with Hela making her objection noted in the official record. The decision was made. The 5th Enforcement Fleet, consisting of 200 warships from 6 different Council species, would be dispatched to the Proxima system. They would arrive, demonstrate the Council's power, and humanity would be given one more chance to surrender and accept the Council's authority. On Earth, the response to Captain Daniel Wright's defiance had been swift. Within 3 hours of his cutting communication with Ambassador Kalara, every major government on the planet had been briefed. Within 6 hours, President Karen Mitchell had called an emergency meeting of Earth Security Council. Within 12 hours, humanity had made a decision that would change everything. President Mitchell stood in the Situation Room deep beneath the White House, surrounded by military advisors, cabinet members, and the heads of every space agency on Earth. The room was designed for crisis management, with screens covering every wall displaying real-time data from across human-controlled space. Right now, those screens showed something that made everyone in the room tense with anticipation and fear. The Galactic Council fleet was gathering at the edge of human space, and satellite reconnaissance had counted at least 200 warships. They're actually coming, Vice President Greg Palmer said, his voice tight with stress. 200 ships. We've never faced anything like this. Admiral Richard Cole stood near the largest tactical display, studying the enemy fleet composition with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 40 years in military service. He had joined the Navy when he was 18 and had worked his way up through determination and skill. When humanity had developed faster than light travel, he had been one of the first to volunteer for the new space fleet. Now he commanded all of Earth's military forces beyond the atmosphere, and he was looking at an enemy that outnumbered his ships by nearly 3-1. "We have 75 warships that can reach Proxima in time," Admiral Cole reported. "The Council fleet consists of vessels from 6 different species. The Krask ships are the most dangerous, heavily armed and armored. The Zenthi vessels rely on energy weapons and strong shields. The others are support craft and carriers. In terms of raw firepower, they outgun us significantly." Karen Mitchell had been president for 2 years, and in that time she had dealt with economic crises, natural disasters, and political opposition. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, the possibility that her decisions might lead to war with alien civilizations. She was 53 years old, a former senator who had campaigned on unity and progress. Now she had to decide whether humanity would fight or surrender. "Can we win?" she asked directly. Admiral Cole was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "In a straight fight, ship to ship, we would lose. Their technology is more advanced in many ways. Their shields are stronger, their weapons have longer range. But warfare is not just about technology, Madam President. It's about tactics, training, and will. We've been studying Council military doctrine for 3 years. They fight the way species fight when they have not had a real war in centuries. They rely on overwhelming force and intimidation. Their formations are rigid, their tactics are predictable, and their crews are not prepared for an enemy that fights back hard." Captain Daniel Wright had been summoned to Earth for the briefing. Transported down from the Valiant by shuttle, he stood near Admiral Cole, still in his uniform, and he spoke up when the Admiral finished. "They expect us to surrender when we see their numbers. Every species the Council has ever faced has done exactly that. They show up with massive fleets, make demands, and their opponents fold. They have no experience fighting someone who refuses to quit." Karen looked at the faces around the room. These were good people, smart people, and they were all looking to her for leadership. She thought about the 2 million colonists on Proxima who had built their lives in good faith. She thought about the millions more humans spread across a dozen other colony worlds. She thought about Earth itself, 10 billion people who deserve to live free from alien control. "We're not going to surrender," Karen said firmly. "Admiral Cole, deploy the fleet. Captain Wright, return to your ship. Show the Galactic Council that humanity is done being pushed around." The Council's 5th Enforcement Fleet arrived at the edge of the Proxima system in perfect formation. 200 warships arranged in a display meant to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. At the center of the formation flew the flagship Eternal Justice, a massive Krask battlecruiser that stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. On its bridge stood Admiral Threk, an insectoid commander whose species had been warriors for 10,000 years before they ever left their homeworld. Threk surveyed the tactical displays with satisfaction. His fleet represented 6 different species, each contributing their strongest vessels to this enforcement action. The humans would take one look at this armada and realize the futility of resistance. Every species in galactic history had done exactly that when faced with Council might. The humans would be no different. "Open a channel to the human colony," Threk ordered, his mandibles clicking together in what his species considered a smile. "Let us give them the opportunity to surrender with dignity." The communication officer established the link, and Threk's translator began broadcasting his message to the colony below and to any human vessels in the system. His voice was harsh and grating even through translation, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "This is Admiral Threk of the Galactic Council 5th Enforcement Fleet. The human settlement on Proxima 2 is in violation of Council territorial law. You have 1 solar hour to begin evacuation procedures and surrender control of this system. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Compliance is your only option." The response came not from the colony, but from the darkness of space behind the Council fleet. Sensors across the armada suddenly lit up with contact warnings as 75 Earth warships dropped their stealth fields and appeared from nowhere. They had been there the entire time, waiting in the black, their advanced cloaking systems hiding them from Council detection. Now they materialized like ghosts, already in attack position with their weapons locked on target. Daniel Wright sat in the command chair of the Valiant, watching his tactical display update in real time. Every ship in the Earth Defense Fleet was exactly where it needed to be. They had spent 3 days positioning themselves, using the asteroid field and the system's outer planets as cover, while they waited for the Council fleet to arrive. Now the trap was set, and the Council had walked right into it. "This is Captain Daniel Wright of the Earth Defense Fleet," he broadcast on all frequencies, making sure every ship in both fleets could hear him clearly. "You came to our system. You threatened our people. You assumed we would be afraid. That was your first mistake. All Earth ships, weapons free. Show them what happens when you push humanity too far." The Battle of Proxima began with a coordinated strike that took the Council fleet completely by surprise. Human missiles, launched from concealed positions, struck command ships across the enemy formation. The Valiant and her sister ships accelerated forward, their railguns firing streams of metal at relativistic speeds. The rigid Council formation, designed for intimidation rather than combat effectiveness, suddenly became a liability as ships found themselves unable to maneuver without colliding with their allies. Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated the tactical response from her station, her fingers dancing across controls as she directed targeting solutions to the fleet. She had spent the last month studying every piece of intelligence they had on Council military capabilities, looking for weaknesses and finding plenty. The Council species had grown soft after centuries of peace. Their ships were powerful but slow to respond. Their crews drilled constantly but had never faced real combat. Their doctrine assumed enemies would either surrender or fight defensively. "Target their command and control vessels first," Lisa called out to the weapon stations. "Disrupt their communications. Make it so they cannot coordinate." Lieutenant Jake Morris piloted his fighter craft through a storm of enemy fire, his hand steady on the controls despite the fact that death was only meters away in every direction. He had been assigned to lead a squadron of 20 fighters, small craft that could slip between the larger warships and strike at vulnerable points. His display showed friendly contacts in green and hostiles in red, and there were so many red contacts that the screen looked like it was bleeding. But Jake had been training for this his entire adult life. He came from a military family. His father had flown combat missions back when Earth still fought its wars on the ground, and he had inherited both talent and determination. Now he put both to use as he dove toward a Zenthi cruiser, his targeting computer tracking the ship's shield generators. The fighters' weapons were small compared to capital ship armaments, but they were precise. And precision mattered when you knew where to hit. His missiles struck the shield generator just as it cycled between power phases, a timing trick that Lisa Hayes had discovered in the intelligence data. The explosion was satisfying, and the Zenthi cruiser suddenly found itself vulnerable. Seconds later, a salvo from the Earth destroyer Freedom punched through where the shields had been and crippled the enemy vessel. All across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human tactics, developed through centuries of warfare on Earth, proved devastatingly effective against an enemy that had forgotten how to fight. The Earth ships moved in coordinated wolfpack formations, targeting single enemy vessels with overwhelming firepower before moving to the next target. They used electronic warfare to jam communications and sensors. They employed decoys and false contacts to confuse enemy targeting. They struck from unexpected angles and disappeared before the Council could respond. Admiral Threck watched in growing horror as his fleet fell apart around him. Ships were exploding, listing out of control or breaking formation in panic. His communication channels were chaos as commanders shouted for orders, called for help, or simply screamed as their vessels died. He had commanded fleets for 40 years and had never seen anything like this. The humans fought like nothing he had encountered, vicious and clever and absolutely unwilling to quit. "All ships, reform defensive positions," Threck ordered, trying to restore order to the chaos. "Concentrate fire on their capital ships. Drive them back." But reforming was easier ordered than accomplished. The Council fleet consisted of 6 different species with 6 different military traditions and communication protocols. Under normal circumstances, the combined fleet operated smoothly because they never faced serious opposition. Now under pressure, the cracks showed. Krask ships wanted to charge forward and engage directly. Zenthi vessels tried to hold position and use their superior range. Yalari craft attempted to flank. The result was a disaster as different species pursued different tactics and left gaps in their formation that human ships exploited ruthlessly. The Valiant shuddered as enemy fire struck her shields, and Daniel gripped his armrest as damage reports scrolled across his display. They were not invincible, and good people were dying on both sides. 3 Earth destroyers had already been destroyed, and 2 more were heavily damaged and falling back. But the Council was losing ships at 3 times that rate, and more importantly, they were losing cohesion. "Captain, enemy flagship is attempting to reorganize their fleet," Lisa reported. "If we can take out Threk's ship, the rest might break." Daniel nodded. "Signal the Roosevelt and the Kennedy. Coordinate attack on the Eternal Justice. We end this now." 3 Earth battleships, the heaviest vessels in the human fleet, turned toward the Council flagship. They came in from different vectors. Their combined firepower focused on a single target. The Eternal Justice was enormous and well protected, but even its shields could not withstand a sustained assault from 3 directions simultaneously. Railgun rounds hammered at the shields, each impact weakening them slightly. Missiles struck in waves, forcing the defensive systems to prioritize threats. Energy weapons, borrowed technology that humanity had acquired through trade and improved with typical human innovation, carved burning lines across the enemy hull. Admiral Threk felt his ship dying beneath him. Explosions rocked the bridge as systems overloaded and failed. His tactical officer reported that shields were down to 15%. His communications officer could not raise half the fleet. His weapons officer reported that main batteries were offline. Around him, crew members worked frantically to keep the ship functional, but it was a losing battle. "Admiral, we must retreat," his second-in-command urged. "We have lost over a third of our fleet. If we stay, we will lose everything." Threk looked at his display one last time. 57 Council ships had been destroyed. Another 30 were too damaged to fight. The humans had lost only 9 vessels. It was not supposed to be this way. The Council always won. The Council had overwhelming power. But power meant nothing if you did not know how to use it, and the humans had just taught the galaxy a very expensive lesson. "Signal the fleet," Threk said quietly. "General retreat. All ships withdraw to hyperspace." The remaining Council vessels turned and ran, their faster-than-light drives engaging as they fled the Proxima system. News of the Battle of Proxima spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by traders and diplomats and refugees from the defeated Council fleet. Every species that heard the story had the same initial reaction: disbelief. The Galactic Council had not lost a military engagement in over 2,000 years. Their fleets were considered invincible, their authority absolute. Yet the humans, a species that had barely left their homeworld 15 years ago, had destroyed over a third of an enforcement fleet and sent the rest running. Ambassador Kalara stood before the emergency council session, her crystalline form flickering with colors that indicated shame and anger in equal measure. She had been one of the strongest voices calling for military action against humanity, and now that action had resulted in the worst defeat the council had suffered in living memory. Around the chamber, other representatives whispered and argued, some calling for immediate retaliation while others questioned whether confronting humanity was wise at all. "The humans got lucky," Kalara insisted, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "They caught our fleet by surprise. If we assemble a larger force, if we commit truly overwhelming numbers, they cannot possibly stand against us. I propose we gather the Grand Armada. Every council species contributes ships. We will crush them so completely that no species will ever dare defy us again." General Vorn, whose Krask warriors had made up a quarter of the defeated fleet, was angrier than anyone had ever seen him. He had lost friends in the battle, good officers who had served under him for decades. His pride demanded revenge, but his military training told him that revenge was not strategy. The humans had beaten trained warriors with superior tactics and coordination. Simply throwing more ships at them might not change the outcome. "I agree we must respond," Vorn growled, "but we must understand how they defeated us before we engage them again." Their tactics were unlike anything in our databases. They fought with a level of coordination and aggression that suggests extensive military experience. Where did a species so new to space learn to fight like that? Ambassador Hela finally spoke, and when she did, the entire chamber fell silent. The Lumina Collective rarely involved themselves in council politics, preferring to observe and advise rather than direct. But Hela had studied humanity closely, and she understood what the others did not. They learned to fight on their own world. Hela said softly, "Humanity has been at war for its entire history. They have fought each other for thousands of years, developing tactics and strategies and weapons. While we achieved peace and forgot how to wage war, they never stopped preparing for it. When they came to space, they brought that knowledge with them. We are facing a species that treats warfare as naturally as breathing. The chamber erupted in debate. Some representatives argued that this made humanity even more dangerous and required immediate action. Others suggested that perhaps negotiating with such a warlike species might be preferable to fighting them. The vote was close, but in the end, fear and pride won out. The Council voted to assemble the Grand Armada, calling on every member species to contribute vessels. Within weeks, over 600 warships began gathering at the staging point, the largest military force the galaxy had seen in centuries. On Earth, President Karen Mitchell addressed the planet from the White House. Her face broadcast to every screen across humanity's territories. She looked tired but determined, the weight of leadership showing in the lines around her eyes. Behind her, flags of all Earth's nations hung as symbols of unity in the face of external threat. Citizens of Earth and all human colonies, Karen began, her voice steady. We have won a great victory at Proxima. Our brave defenders showed the galaxy that humanity will not be intimidated or controlled. But I must be honest with you. The Council is gathering a new fleet, much larger than the last. They are coming again. And this time they mean to crush us completely. We face a choice. We can surrender and accept whatever terms they demand, or we can stand and fight for our freedom. I believe we should fight. I believe that some things are worth more than safety. But this decision affects everyone, and everyone deserves to know what we're facing. The response from Earth's population was overwhelming. People rallied in support of continued resistance. Young men and women volunteered for the defense forces in numbers that surprised even military recruiters. Factories shifted to war production. Scientists worked around the clock on new weapons and defenses. Humanity had been unified in purpose only a few times in its long history. But when faced with external threat, old divisions faded and a common identity emerged. Admiral Richard Cole coordinated the defense preparations from Earth Command, working with only a few hours of sleep each night. The Council's Grand Armada would arrive in approximately 3 months, and those months had to be used wisely. Every asteroid in the outer solar system was being converted into an automated weapons platform. Mines were being laid along likely approach routes. The entire human fleet was being retrofitted with improved weapons and shields based on data gathered during the Battle of Proxima. Captain Daniel Wright took command of a special operations group tasked with disrupting Council preparations. While the enemy gathered their armada, human forces would strike at their supply lines and infrastructure, buying time and sowing confusion. It was asymmetric warfare at its finest, using speed and unpredictability to counter superior numbers. The Valiant led a small fleet deep into Council space, traveling through rarely used hyperspace routes to avoid detection. Their first target was a Zenthi manufacturing facility that produced shield generators for Council warships. Commander Lisa Hayes had identified it as critical to the enemy's ability to field new vessels, and destroying it would set back their production by months. The raid happened at night by the station's local time. 3 human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their stealth fields making them nearly invisible. They approached the manufacturing station carefully, avoiding the few patrol ships that wandered nearby. When they were in position, teams of Marines led by Lieutenant Jake Morris boarded the station through maintenance airlocks. Jake moved through the station corridors with his team, their combat armor sealed and weapons ready. The Zenthi workers they encountered were not soldiers and offered no resistance. Jake made sure his people treated them humanely, securing them in cargo bays where they would be safe. This was not about killing civilians. This was about disrupting the Council's ability to make war. His team reached the main reactor core and placed carefully calculated explosive charges. They had 20 minutes to evacuate before detonation. Jake led his Marines back through the corridors, helping carry a Zenthi child who had been separated from her parents in the confusion. When they returned to their ship and signaled the all clear, the charges detonated exactly on schedule. The manufacturing facility would produce nothing for the foreseeable future. Other human teams struck across Council space with similar precision. Captain Rachel Torres destroyed a supply depot that served the Krask military. Commander Paul Henderson ambushed transport convoys, capturing supplies that would have fed the gathering armada. Each raid was carefully planned to minimize casualties while maximizing disruption. The goal was not to kill, but to demonstrate that nowhere in Council space was truly safe. The raids had another effect that Earth Command had not anticipated. Public opinion within Council territories began to shift. Citizens of member species started questioning whether this war was necessary. Why were they fighting humans who had only defended their own territory? Why had the Council tried to restrict human expansion in the first place? The questions grew louder with each raid, each demonstration that the humans could strike anywhere. Ambassador Hela watched the growing dissent within Council territories with quiet satisfaction. She had predicted this outcome. The Council had maintained power through intimidation and the threat of force, but that power was based on the assumption that no one would effectively resist. Humanity had shattered that assumption, and now cracks were appearing in the foundation. 3 months after the Battle of Proxima, the Grand Armada was ready. Over 600 warships from 12 different species gathered at the edge of human space, an armada so vast that it could be seen with telescopes from Earth itself. Admiral Threk had been given a second chance to command, his previous failure forgiven in light of the need for experienced leadership. But this time he approached the enemy with caution rather than confidence. General Vorn stood beside Threk on the flagship bridge, watching the tactical displays. Both military leaders knew they were about to fight an enemy that had already beaten them once. Both knew that despite their overwhelming numbers, victory was not guaranteed. The humans had proven resourceful, clever, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. "They will be waiting for us," Vorn said quietly. "They will have prepared defenses. This will not be as simple as sailing in and demanding surrender." Threk nodded. "I know, but we have our orders. The Council demands that humanity be brought to heel, so we will fight and we will see who wants victory more." The Grand Armada crossed into human space with all the majesty and power of 600 warships, moving in perfect formation. Admiral Threk watched the tactical displays from his flagship, seeing his vast fleet stretched out across the darkness like a constellation of deadly stars. Every ship had been inspected, every crew drilled to readiness, every weapon system tested and certified. This time there would be no surprises, no ambushes, no humiliating defeats. This time the Council would show humanity the true meaning of overwhelming force. But even as the Armada advanced, problems were already appearing. 3 separate species used 3 different communication protocols, making coordination difficult despite weeks of practice. Supply ships struggled to keep pace with the battle fleet, creating gaps in the logistics chain. Worst of all, morale was low among many crews who questioned why they were fighting a war that did not directly threaten their homeworlds. The unity that looked so impressive from outside was fragile underneath. The humans had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, and Earth's solar system had been transformed into a fortress. Captain Daniel Wright coordinated the defense from the Valiant, which hung in space near Mars alongside the rest of the Earth defense fleet. His tactical display showed every mine, every weapons platform, every defensive position that had been prepared. The outer solar system had become a maze of automated defenses, each one designed to slow the enemy advance and inflict casualties. Commander Lisa Hayes worked at her station, her hands moving steadily across the controls as she monitored the enemy's approach. She had analyzed every battle the Council had fought in recorded history, looking for patterns and weaknesses. What she found was that the Council relied on mass and momentum, pushing forward with overwhelming numbers until the enemy collapsed. Human strategy was to turn that strength into a weakness by making every meter of advance cost blood. The battle began at the edge of the Kuiper Belt, where the first automated defense platforms opened fire on the advancing Council fleet. Missiles streaked through space targeting the leading ships. Laser batteries hidden on asteroids carved into enemy shields. Minefields detonated as Council vessels passed through them. The damage was not catastrophic, but it slowed the advance and forced the enemy to deploy countermeasures. Admiral Threk ordered the fleet to press forward despite the harassment. They had expected defenses and had come prepared to overcome them. The Armada's shields absorbed most of the automated fire, and combat engineers began clearing minefields. Progress was slower than Threk would have liked, but it was steady. Within 6 hours, the Council fleet had advanced halfway through the outer system. Then the human ships struck from unexpected angles, just as they had at Proxima. Small squadrons appeared from behind planets and moons, fired their weapons, and disappeared before the Council could respond effectively. Lieutenant Jake Morris led a fighter wing that danced through the enemy formation, targeting communication relays and sensor arrays. Each strike was surgical and precise, designed to disrupt rather than destroy. General Vorn watched the human tactics with grudging respect. They were not trying to stop the advance because they knew they could not. Instead, they were bleeding the Council fleet slowly, wearing down shields and morale with constant harassment. It was smart warfare, the kind that required patience and discipline. It was also infuriating because there was no simple counter to it. For 2 days, the battle continued as the Council fleet pushed deeper into the solar system. They reached Mars orbit and found the bulk of the human fleet waiting in defensive positions around the red planet. 75 Earth warships, the same number that had won at Proxima, hung in space ready to make their stand. Behind them, Earth itself glowed blue and white. 10 billion people watching the battle that would decide their future. President Karen Mitchell stood in the command center beneath Washington, surrounded by advisors and military leaders. She watched the tactical displays with a calm expression that hid the fear she felt inside. The Council fleet still numbered over 500 ships despite the losses they had taken getting here. The odds were terrible, but surrender was not an option. Humanity would fight to the last ship if necessary. Admiral Richard Cole stood at the main tactical station, coordinating the fleet's response. He had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, though he had never imagined it would actually come. Now all the training, all the planning, all the sacrifices would be tested. He opened a channel to every ship in the human fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Cole. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for the right of humanity to determine its own destiny. The Council thinks they can force us to submit. They think their numbers guarantee victory. Show them they are wrong. Show them that humans do not surrender. All ships engage at will. The space around Mars erupted in fire and fury as both fleets collided. The Council ships came in waves, trying to overwhelm the human defenses through sheer mass. The Earth vessels fought in coordinated groups, concentrating fire on single targets before shifting to the next. Explosions lit up the darkness as ships from both sides died, their reactors detonating in brilliant flashes that faded quickly in the void. Daniel Wright commanded the Valiant through the chaos, his voice steady as he issued orders. Around him, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency despite the violence happening outside their hull. Lisa Hayes coordinated targeting solutions. Jake Morris led his fighters through impossible maneuvers. Every human ship fought with a desperation born from the knowledge that losing meant the end of their freedom. Then something unexpected happened. A section of the Council fleet suddenly stopped firing and began broadcasting on emergency channels. The Lumina collective ships, 12 vessels of pure energy beings, broke formation and withdrew from the battle. Ambassador Hilla's voice echoed across all frequencies, calm and clear despite the chaos. The Lumina collective withdraws from this conflict. We have observed humanity closely since first contact. They fight not from aggression, but from the desire to be free. We cannot in good conscience participate in denying them what we ourselves hold most sacred. Any species that wishes to join us in withdrawing is welcome to do so. The announcement sent shockwaves through both fleets. On the Council flagship, Admiral Threck stared at his display in disbelief as the Lumina ships pulled away from the battle. Then other vessels began following their lead. The Yalari delegate had been quietly opposed to the war from the beginning, and now his species' ships turned away. The Draken ambassador, seeing the tide turning, ordered his ships to cease fire. Within an hour, the Council armada had lost a third of its strength not to human weapons but to desertion. The remaining ships continued fighting, but the coordination was gone, replaced by confusion and doubt. Each species began making its own decisions about whether to continue the battle. General Vorn stood on the flagship bridge, watching his armada fall apart. He had been a soldier his entire life, had fought in dozens of campaigns, and he knew when a battle was lost. This was not about ships or weapons anymore. This was about will, and the humans had more of it. They were willing to die for their freedom, while the Council species were not willing to die to take it away. "Signal Admiral Threck," Vorn said quietly. "Tell him to request a ceasefire. This war is over." On the Valiant, Daniel Wright received the unexpected transmission. Ambassador Kalara appeared on his screen. Her crystalline form dimmed with something that might have been humility. Behind her, he could see other Council representatives, all looking far less confident than they had 3 months ago. "Captain Wright," Kalara began, and her voice carried none of its previous arrogance. "The Galactic Council requests an immediate ceasefire. We wish to open negotiations. As equals." Daniel glanced at Lisa Hayes, who nodded slightly. They had won not just the battle, but the larger war. Humanity had proven that it could not be forced into submission, and the Council had learned that some species were willing to pay any price for freedom. "We accept your request for ceasefire," Daniel replied, "but the negotiations will take place on Earth. You come to us, not the other way around, and you will negotiate with our president, not with ship captains. Those are our terms." 2 weeks later, Council representatives walked through the streets of New York City, experiencing Earth firsthand. They saw a world that was crowded and chaotic and beautiful, filled with people who had spent their entire history fighting each other, but had united when faced with external threat. They attended the treaty negotiations at the United Nations building, where President Karen Mitchell represented humanity with quiet dignity. The Treaty of Earth was signed on a sunny afternoon. With cameras recording every moment for history, humanity was recognized as a fully sovereign power with all rights and privileges. Human colonies would be respected and protected. Human expansion would be unrestricted. Most importantly, the treaty established that no species could be forced into compliance through threats or military action. The Council would have to earn cooperation through respect, rather than demand it through fear.